Welcome to Shell's Spooky Stories, where the line between fact and fiction blurs into shadow. I'm your host Shell, and tonight we're travelling deep into the heart of Essex, England, to a place that holds a dark distinction in the annals of paranormal history. A place that earned such a terrifying reputation that even the bravest investigators would leave forever, changed by what they encountered within its walls. What I'm about to tell you, well, you'll have to decide for yourself if it's true. But I warn you, some stories are better left untold, and some houses are better left to their shadows. This is the story of Borley Rectory, known throughout the world as the most haunted house in England. But before we step into those haunted halls, we need to understand the land itself. You see, Essex has always been a place of ancient mysteries. Its rolling hills and misty valleys hide secrets that stretch back centuries. And in the small village of Borley, those secrets run deeper than most. Long before the rectory cast its shadow over the landscape, a Benedictine monastery stood on that very ground. The year was 1362, and according to local legends, a young monk named Edward de Lisel would often walk the monastery grounds, lost in prayer and contemplation. But his peaceful routine was forever altered when he caught sight of a beautiful nun named Marianne from the nearby convent. Their eyes met across the monastery gardens one misty morning, and in that moment, their fates were sealed. Despite their sacred vows, despite the strict rules that governed their lives, they fell deeply, desperately in love. For months they met in secret, exchanging letters and whispered promises in the shadow of the ancient walls. But in a small village like Borley, secrets have a way of surfacing. A fellow nun discovered their forbidden romance and, duty-bound, reported them to her superiors. The punishment was swift and merciless. Edward was executed, forced to watch as his beloved Marie was led away, but death would have been a mercy compared to what awaited her. The church authorities decided to make an example of Marie. She was taken to a prepared cell within the convent walls. As she watched in horror, masons began to lay brick after brick, sealing her into what would become her living tomb. They say her screams echoed through the village for days, growing weaker and weaker, until finally, silence fell. But death, dear listeners, was not the end of their story. It was only the beginning. 500 years later, in 1862, Reverend Henry Bull decided to build a magnificent new rectory on that very spot. The village elders warned him about the land's dark history, about the sounds of phantom bells that still rang in the night, about the figure of a nun seen walking the grounds. But Bull was a man of God, educated and rational. He dismissed their superstitions and proceeded with construction. The rectory he built was impressive, a sprawling Victorian mansion with over 20 rooms, numerous chimneys, and long drafty corridors. But from the very beginning, something wasn't right. The workers reported strange occurrences, tools that vanished only to reappear in impossible places, cold spots that no fire could warm, and most disturbing of all, the sound of a woman weeping in empty rooms. The Bull family tried to maintain a normal life in their new home, but the incidents began almost immediately. Henry's daughters were the first to see her, a young woman in a nun's habit, gliding silently along what would become known as the Nun's Walk. They described her face as pale and sorrowful, her eyes fixed on something distant that only she could see. But the nun was just the beginning. The family reported phantom footsteps echoing through empty corridors at all hours. Objects would move on their own, sometimes floating through the air as if carried by invisible hands. Doors would lock and unlock themselves, and lights would appear in windows of unoccupied rooms. One summer evening in 1900, 4 of Bull's daughters were out in the garden when they saw something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. There in the gathering dusk, a ghostly carriage appeared, drawn by 2 spectral horses. But what made their blood run cold was the revelation that the horses had no heads. The sightings continued year after year, becoming such a regular occurrence that the Bull family began keeping a detailed diary of the phenomena. They noted that the activity seemed to increase around religious holidays, particularly Christmas and Easter? Was this connected to the tragic lovers who died centuries before? When Reverend Bull died in 1892, his son Harry took over the rectory, but by 1927 the house had passed to Reverend Guy Eric Smith and his wife. It was during their tenure that the haunting took an even darker turn. Mrs. Smith was alone in the house one afternoon, organising a seldom-used cupboard, when she made a chilling discovery. Wrapped carefully in brown paper was a human skull. But before she could investigate further, she felt an overwhelming presence behind her. When she turned, there was nothing there, but the temperature had dropped so dramatically that she could see her breath in the air. The Smiths' experiences became so terrifying that they reached out to the Daily Mirror newspaper, hoping that publicity might bring some explanation for the phenomena. This decision would change everything, for it caught the attention of a man named Harry Price. Price was Britain's most famous paranormal investigator, and what he documented at Borley Rectory would make headlines across the nation. During his first visit in 1929, he witnessed phenomena that defied explanation. Objects moved on their own, often being thrown across rooms by invisible forces. Messages appeared on walls, messages that seemed to come from the other side. But it was during his séances that the most chilling communications occurred. Through various mediums, Price claimed to make contact with multiple spirits that haunted the rectory. Some seemed peaceful, lost souls trying to find their way. Others were malevolent, filled with a hatred that seemed to poison the very air. One particularly disturbing séance revealed the presence of a male spirit who identified himself as Sunex Amores. He claimed that he would burn the rectory down at 9 o'clock that night. While no fire occurred at the predicted time, this threat would prove frighteningly prophetic in the years to come, but it was during the tenure of Reverend Lionel Foyster and his wife Marianne in 1930 that the haunting reached its terrifying peak. Marianne, young and beautiful, seemed to become the focus of the supernatural activity. She reported being slapped and pushed by invisible hands, often showing bruises and scratches that appeared without explanation. Objects would vanish from one room only to rain down in another. Bottles of ink would fly across rooms, shattering against walls. But most disturbing were the messages that began appearing on the walls, messages that seemed directed specifically at Marianne. "Marianne, please help get," one message read, trailing off into illegible scrawls. Another begged, "Marianne, light mass prayers." The writings would appear in broad daylight, sometimes forming while people watched, written by invisible hands. The Foysters attempted multiple exorcisms, bringing in various clergy members to cleanse the house, but each attempt seemed to only aggravate whatever forces dwelled within the rectory's walls. The activity became so violent, so terrifying, that by 1935 they could take no more. They fled the house, leaving it to its ghostly inhabitants. Harry Price returned to conduct an extensive investigation, bringing in a team of researchers who would live in the house and document everything they experienced. Their findings filled entire notebooks. Phantom footsteps, spectral appearances, objects moving on their own, and perhaps most chilling, the sound of a woman's voice pleading for help in the dead of night. But on February 27, 1939, everything changed. A fire broke out in the rectory's library, reportedly started when a stack of books mysteriously fell onto an oil lamp. The flames spread with supernatural speed, as if driven by an unseen force. By morning, the most haunted house in England was nothing but smouldering ruins. But the story wasn't over. During the excavation of the ruins, workers made a discovery that sent chills through the paranormal community. In the cellar, buried beneath centuries of dirt and debris, they found human remains, small, delicate bones that could have belonged to a young woman. Were these the remains of Marie Laer, the tragic nun whose love led to her terrible death? Had she been there all along, beneath the feet of those who lived and died in Borley Rectory? Or was there an even darker secret buried in that cursed ground? The debate rages to this day. Skeptics claim that Harry Price fabricated evidence, that the haunting was an elaborate hoax designed to make his reputation. They point to inconsistencies in testimony, to the convenient timing of certain events, but others
Others insist that every word of the Borley haunting is true.
The rectory may be gone now, its mighty walls reduced to dust and memory, but its legacy lives on. Even today, visitors to the site report strange phenomena, unexplained lights dancing in the darkness, phantom footsteps crunching on gravel paths, and yes, the figure of a nun, still walking her eternal path, still searching for her lost love. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between, in that shadowy realm where reality and nightmare blur together. Perhaps some places like Borley Rectory become more than just buildings. They become repositories for human emotion, for love and hate, for joy and terror, until the very walls seem to breathe with the weight of accumulated history. So tonight, as you lie in your bed, listening to my voice in the darkness, ask yourself, what really happened at Borley Rectory? Was it mass hysteria, an elaborate hoax? Or did something truly supernatural stalk those hallowed halls? And if you hear footsteps in your hallway tonight, if you catch a glimpse of a dark figure in your peripheral vision, if you feel a sudden chill that seems to freeze your very soul, remember the tragic lovers of Borley Rectory. Remember that sometimes, just sometimes, love is stronger than death itself. This has been Shell's Spooky Stories. Until next time, dear listeners, sweet dreams, if you can manage them.
Thanks for tuning in to tonight's chilling tale, but the hauntings don't have to end here. If you love ghost stories and crave even more spine-tingling content, why not unlock the other side? Join our exclusive membership for bonus episodes, behind-the-scenes extras and much more. The link is waiting for you in the description below. And do you have a story of your own? Something that keeps you up at night? Share your experience through the links in the description. You might just hear your own story being featured on upcoming episodes. And before you go, don't forget to like this video, share it with your fellow ghost story lovers, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a shadow in the dark. Stay spooky, and we'll see you on the other side.